Hello, my friends, and welcome to the Talking Cryptocurrency podcast. I'm your host, Jason Rigden. On this episode of the show, we're talking to Joshy Orndorff of RChain. RChain is a cooperative that is trying to solve some of the most important issues facing the blockchain. We're really lucky to have Joshy come on and talk about RChain. This is a great interview and a really interesting project. You're going to love this episode, but first, I've got this quick message. Hello, if you like this episode and you want to hear more like it, please make sure you subscribe to the podcast. That way you'll get every single episode. The Talking Cryptocurrency podcast is available on all podcast clients. You can subscribe to the show on Apple Podcasts, Google Podcasts, Pocket Cast, Stitcher, Spotify, or wherever else you listen to podcasts. And if podcasts aren't your thing, I publish video versions of these interviews on YouTube and DTube, so you can subscribe there too. All the links to all that stuff is going to be in the show notes. So please, if you want to hear more of this show, subscribe. Hello, and on this episode, I'm here with Joshy Orndorff of RChain. How are you doing today?
Hi, I'm great, Jason. Thanks for having me.
So you've got a pretty big project here, but could you tell me a little bit about the problems you're trying to solve with RChain?
Sure. RChain is what we're describing as a third-generation blockchain project. So it follows in the footsteps of first-generation projects like Bitcoin that focused on one specific application, so like the financial application. And then second-generation projects like Ethereum that realize blockchains, like we discovered from Bitcoin, can be used much more generally than just a financial application or any one specific application. They can actually be used for coordination at scale, like around the globe. So the problem that we're solving is that same problem, coordination at scale. And by being the reason we call ourselves third generation is because in addition to doing the things that projects like Ethereum do and other smart contracting platforms, we're making specific improvements, and the ones that we're focused most on are better scaling. So I don't know if you remember the CryptoKitties phenomenon that happened maybe last summer, about a year ago. So we want to make sure that RChain is a platform that can not only scale for apps like CryptoKitties that are exciting, but also for even bigger ones like global financial transactions or global social media. And we're basically trying to build a blockchain robust enough and stable enough and scalable enough that we can really reboot the way that people coordinate with each other around the world so that they can do it in a trustless way and in a way that doesn't rely on centralized organizations.
So you're solving some of the biggest pain points in blockchain right now.
Yeah, that's exactly right. So the scaling one is the most famous one. Another one that we're trying to take care of is cost. So the more, both Bitcoin and Ethereum and lots of other projects look really great when the network is under light to medium load and they really meet the promises that they made. But the trouble is once the network starts to get bogged down a little bit, it's not just a throughput issue. That also drives up the cost of transacting on the network. So we're trying to tackle both of those. And then one more thing that RChain adds that previous projects haven't is a proof of stake consensus mechanism. So we're doing away with the proof of work and the mining, and we're hoping to solve the power consumption issue, or we actually are confident that we're solving the power consumption issue that happens that you hear about with like mining Bitcoins, for example. Yeah,
it's a big concern. And so how are you solving these issues with RChain?
Yeah, great. So the scalability issue, the biggest thing that we're doing, there's really two parts to this. I'll mention the one that maybe you've heard of before. It's called sharding. So several projects are working on sharding, and Ethereum's one of them. And we actually work pretty close with Ethereum and some of their developers on Casper proof of stake. So if anyone's familiar with that, we're basically using the same proof of stake mechanism. And the whole idea with distributed consensus that proof of work solves is that we need people to propose the next block to go into a blockchain. And so in proof of work, what you're doing is you're racing to solve this math puzzle, and whoever solves it first gets to propose the next block. And that's great because there's no way to know who's going to be in charge next. So if someone wanted to take down a proof of work network, they can't just take down the leader because the leader changes all the time. The disadvantage there is that it takes a ton of electricity to solve those math problems, and it's not really doing any useful work. So what we're doing instead is a system called called proof of stake. And so instead of being a miner, you're what we call a validator, and you put up a bunch of your funds. We say you stake your funds. And so then any validator can create a block whenever they want. So blocks come out much more frequently. Like in Ethereum, the target block time is 15 seconds. And with RChain, we can get many blocks per second. And anyone can propose them without having to solve a proof of work. So they don't have to use all of that computational energy to solve the proof of work problem. And so it makes the whole thing a lot more energy efficient.
Oh, and how do transaction fees go into this?
Yeah, good. That's right. So there are still transaction fees. We have a model that's sort of similar to the gas-based model in Ethereum. We don't call it gas. We call it we use this old physics word, phlogiston, or just flow for short. And it's really similar, but it's sort of subtly different in the sense that with gas, you're just keeping track of how complicated was the code that I ran. So like in Ethereum, I make a transaction, and if my transaction's something simple, like just sending a couple ETH, then that's just going to cost me a little bit of gas. But if it's something bigger, like running a big smart contract, that takes a lot more gas, and I have to pay a lot more for that transaction. And so that's similar in RChain. It's almost identical. The difference is with Flow, it's not one dimensional. We're keeping track of a couple different resources we're using. So like computation is one of them, and storage is one of them, and bandwidth is one of them. So we can sort of quantify these different resources independently from each other.
Oh, that's very good. Yeah, that's been some of the critique of some of the other smart contract systems, is that they kind of often roll it all into one.
Yeah, exactly right. So we're trying to keep track of each of those differently. And so then another thing that we're doing is sharding. And so basically what sharding means is instead of having just one central blockchain where everybody's waiting in line to use this same computer, sort of global computer, we have several different shards, and each shard is actually an independent blockchain. But what makes them still one network, and what makes them still called just RChain as opposed to RChain A and RChain B and all these totally isolated networks, is that they can still communicate with each other, and they can still move funds. Our native token is called Rev, so you can still move Rev back and forth between shards. You can still interact with smart contracts that live on different shards. The beauty of it is when you're within your shard, you generally join a shard where you're going to interact with people a lot. So you can imagine if we're talking about daily commerce, the people that I buy stuff from most often are the grocery store down the street and the gas station around the corner and all these places geographically close to me. So we might set up geographic-based shards. And what that means is we only have to get consensus on the transactions with people in our shard, in that example, in our local geographic area. But the shards don't just have to be geographic. We could have like shards for specific decentralized applications. So you can create these shards with people you're going to interact with a lot. And so you need this smaller consensus group. We don't have to get consensus among every single transaction in the whole worldwide network. Only when we're interacting with each other or crossing shards do we have to have the bigger consensus.
Okay. It seems like these shards would help with decentralization.
Yeah, that's right. And they interact in a really cool way too, because every shard itself should in general be decentralized. You can imagine if you need some really high performant application, one of the classic trade-offs in the blockchain space is you're trading off performance for decentralization. The more validators or miners you have and the more spread out around the network they are, the slower the network is going to go. So if I need one really high performance shard, I can just get the validators that are going to be using that shard, and we can deploy in either the same data center or similar geographically nearby data centers. And we can have this really high performance shard, but then we're still linked back to the main RChain network. So any transactions that are happening with the bigger RChain network still have all of the decentralized consensus of the whole big network, whereas these really performant ones, and only those really performant ones, can sacrifice a little bit of the decentralization for higher performance.
Wow, that's really interesting. Yeah, I keep on hearing people building these hybrid networks, and they kind of concern me because it's not really, I feel like sometimes they're just adding decentralization or blockchain onto a centralized server.
Yeah, there's a whole lot of that. The one project that I thought was interesting for a while is EOS, because they were one of the first projects that said, hey, we want to go somewhere else in this trade-off space. Instead of being maximally decentralized, we still want to be pretty decentralized, but not as much as Bitcoin, not as much as Ethereum, and we're going to get way better performance. And so what RChain does is each shard gets to make that trade-off individually. And if you're a user that's particularly libertarian and distrustful and you don't want to be in a not that decentralized shard, that's great. You don't have to be. But if you're someone who really demands the performance of one of these shards, then you can join one that has fewer validators. Maybe it only has 10 validators or 20 or 100 or whatever you think is necessary, but it doesn't have to be everyone that's validating the whole RChain network.
That's cool. Yeah. So it's really fundamentally different than some of the other blockchain systems that are out there.
Yeah, it is. Absolutely.
So what have been some of the problems of developing this?
Yeah. Okay. So that's a great question. Maybe actually before, so there was an issue that we struggled with on that sharding in particular. When we were first envisioning this was actually right about the time I got involved with the project, back in about March, I think. The sharding model was based on a lattice structure, and this is probably a little too technical to dive into all the details, but we realized there were some technical challenges implementing that, and so we've revised it a little bit to be more of a tree structure, and what that means is there's going to be sort of the root shard, which is like the central main RChain shard. It's going to have like the Genesis block. And then every other shard that joins the network gets to mount onto that root shard and become its child. Or you could be the child of a child. And so it spreads out in sort of a tree fashion. So that was one of the technical problems that we encountered. Another one we just encountered recently, and it's not totally clear to me yet whether this is a speed bump or more of a bigger thing where we're going to have to reevaluate a little bit, is that the way we communicate with nodes on the network is through something called gRPC, and there's some message size limits there that we're sort of bumping up against too. So we've got to see how we can up those, I guess.
Is the system operational now, or is it still in development?
Yeah, so we don't have the mainnet launched yet. We are in pre-release right now. Version 0.6 of the node just came out this week. But it's interesting that you ask about when we're going to launch, because actually in just about 2 weeks, and starting on September 3rd, we're having Archon 3 over in Berlin, and that's when we're going to launch the RChain testnet. So for the first time, there'll be a continual worldwide network that people can jump on and play around with. So it's still very much a test net, it's test rev and it's fake money and all that stuff, but it gives everybody a chance to really dive in and experiment with the software on a live network, start building their dApps and prototyping their dApps and that kind of stuff.
Yeah, major milestone in a project. It's gonna be
fun.
Yeah,
it is. It's a really exciting one. The past couple weeks around the project have been this weird combination of people working really hard to get those last couple changes in and get all the documentation polished and get the program together, which can be a little bit intense, but also just this total excitement of like, oh my gosh, we've made it to this point, in just a few weeks, we're going to actually have a testnet live. So it's pretty exciting.
And the structure of RChain co-op is interesting instead of a corporation. Would you talk about that for just a little bit?
Yeah. Oh, yeah. I'd love to. And actually, it's not just a co-op anymore. It's a series of co-ops, which is really great. Yeah. So, the one extreme is on the very first blockchain project is Bitcoin, where it came out as no one owns this. Satoshi was totally anonymous and just released it out to the public. And then lots and lots of other projects are, like you said, run by corporations. I think like probably the most classic example there would be Ripple, where there's really one company that's in charge and making the decisions. So RChain, we talk a lot about decentralized governance, and the goal long term is that RChain will be a platform that can really support all the governance that we need. Obviously, we have to bootstrap that somehow, and so in order to avoid risks of sort of like social centralization, even in open source projects, if you have a dev team that's just a couple people that all work for the same company in the same place, then you can sort of get centralization that way. So instead, what we have is a Washington state cooperative Greg Meredith is the president of that co-op. He's the one who sort of set this whole train in motion. And we just recently launched our European co-op that's based in Berlin, Germany. So that's why RChain is over in Berlin. And then we also are contracting a lot of the development out to a company called Pyrofex. So they're doing the development. We're doing also some of the development and the governance. We started a co-op out in Europe so that we can be, that gives the project this stability in the sense that if for whatever reason, not that we think this is going to happen, but the U.S. government or the Washington state government doesn't want us to continue, we've still also got a co-op over in Europe, and the plan is to grow that community and that pattern throughout the world.
That sounds very smart. How have investors reacted to this co-op model?
Yeah, that's a great question. I don't interact with the investors nearly as much as I do with the technical people. I think right now the biggest sentiment that I'm hearing from investors is, hey, testnet is launching soon. What are all of the economic incentives? Like, what if I'm going to be a validator, how much do I have to stake and how much reward can I expect to earn? Does it only come from transaction fees, or does the co-op subsidize any of that? And so that's forthcoming. We basically have like a tentative plan that we're going to use for testnet, and then based on what happens in testnet and what we learned there, which presumably will be a lot, we're going to have these polished and formalized economic parameters set for mainnet launch, which, by the way, is planned for December of this year.
And how have the developers reacted with this co-op model?
Yeah, for the most part, they love it. It's really interesting. The developers, most of them work for the company called Pyrofex. And so in some sense, the co-op is the boss and they're delivering whatever they're contracted to deliver. But in reality, we're all working together a lot more closely than that and excited about this model. They're all excited about the decentralized governance and think it's a great thing. It's not like the co-op just picked some rando company that was capable of writing code. They found one where the cultures matched and the vision matched and everything. So the two biggest researchers on the project are Greg Meredith, co-op president, and Mike Stay, who's CTO of Pyrofex. So there's definitely a good working relationship there.
Yeah. So for startups, it's a significantly different model than kind of your normal corporation one, where they're really looking maybe for their exit strategy. The co-op really doesn't have that.
Yeah, that's right. And so that's actually another conversation piece that comes up around the community every time. Because right now the co-op is clearly necessary. We don't even have a mainnet to coordinate on yet, and so we coordinate through more traditional ways, like communicating on Discord and writing emails to each other and that sort of stuff. And Greg and the co-op do a good job of keeping us in sync and all of that stuff. But the question that comes up sometimes is, well, what's the long-term vision of the co-op? Like, once mainnet is released and stable, do we still need a co-op? Will they continue to exist? And, I don't know if that question's totally decided. I think the answer is, for the foreseeable future, we're still going to need the co-op, and, we'll see what happens from there.
And so what are some of your plans for the future going forward?
Yeah, so the most tangible ones happen this year. Like I said, we've got a big conference coming up in mainnet launch in just a couple weeks, and then in December we have RChain 4 and mainnet launch. I think that's going to be in Austin, Texas, that December conference. I don't know if that's finalized yet. And then we're also putting together a lot of onboarding materials and developer documentation, because we're getting to the point now where dApp developers are interested. People are saying, hey, I want to develop this dApp. I thought about Ethereum, but now I hear about RChain. Maybe I'll give that a whirl. And if we don't have resources for them to learn how to use RChain, then they might not stick, So that's actually the work that I've been doing personally lately, is writing tutorials for how to program our blockchain and how to interact with the what we call R node. That's the node for RChain.
And so where should people start if they want to learn more about building these dApps?
Yeah, that's a great question. So by the time we get to RChain 3 in 2 weeks, we're going to have a brand new rchain.coop website. You can go to rchain.coop right now. It's about to be totally overhauled, though, and it's going to be complete with a brand new Rolang tutorial, which is our own programming language. It's going to have instructions for how to set up your own node and become a validator on the network, and it's going to have example dApps, so recipes that are called like write your first dApp, and you can copy paste code with some explanations and sort of get up and running that way.
Oh, fantastic. Yeah, RChain is
Yeah.
like I said, it's the kind of the third generation. It's so significantly different, and it addresses so many of the issues that we're facing right now. I talk to people all the time, and their number one issue is those transactions, is how to get the bandwidth, how to get all those transactions.
Yeah, absolutely. It's an ambitious project. We're not just solving the scalability. We're also addressing the speed and the energy consumption. And every once in a while, it feels like we bit off a lot, and I guess we did. But it's exciting, and we're essentially still on schedule. So I'm excited about what RChain has in store.
Well, it's a really great project. Was there anything that I should have asked you that maybe I missed?
Yeah. So there's one other topic that we actually didn't get to, and it's called correct by construction. So I don't want to go too deep into it, but I think people should at least be aware of it, because it's a big thing that RChain offers. Many of the smart contracting platforms so far are suffering from this problem where dApp developers are learning a brand new language, and so naturally there's going to be bugs and mistakes while we're all new here. But unlike when you're learning Python or JavaScript for the first time, these smart contracts are handling people's real world funds. And so if you think about things like the infamous DAO hack in Ethereum, that's really one of the biggest hurdles that blockchain industry as a whole has to cross to get people buying in, because I think there's a lot of people who will be out there and say, all these promises you're making sound awesome. I can't wait until we have decentralized governance and trustless computation and rebooted coordination and all that stuff. But I'm not about to put my money in the smart contract because I saw what happened to the DAO. So with RChain, we have what we call correct by construction programming language. And what that essentially means is that when you write your programs in Rolang, that's our language for writing smart contracts on RChain, you'll be able to sort of, essentially prove them correct. And so what that means is you can make precise statements about your program. So for example, in a voting smart contract, you might want to say something like, no one who is not a citizen is able to vote here. Or you might want to say something like, the declared winner of the election was determined by correctly counting all of the valid votes. And so we can do mathematical proofs in the same way that you prove something like the Pythagorean theorem. You can prove these theorems about your program and be guaranteed that they're actually correct.
Oh, wow, that's fascinating.
Yeah, it is. So that's the piece that actually got me attracted to RChain in the first place. It offers a lot of power in terms of saying, here's why you should use these new decentralized smart contracts, because of all these promises we've been making for years in blockchain, and also because I have a rigorous mathematical proof that this contract does what I think it does, or at least it does these 4 things that I've proven that it does.
There's so much to learn here. It feels like when I was first encountering the blockchain, and there's all these terms and all these things I didn't quite understand. I suppose that's what will be happening as we have each generation. Each iteration will have that wall.
Yeah, I think that's right. So if you're a math person, there's an endlessly interesting body of research that the people at RChain are working on that you can read into, and even if you're not, even if you're more of a hacker type and you just want to write your dApp, rest assured that you'll be able to prove to your potential end users, hey, don't worry, this thing isn't going to get hacked in this specific way because I've proven that isn't going to happen.
Well, that's fantastic. I'll make sure I have all the links in the show notes for the Archon and all those things we talked about. It's a really interesting project. I really encourage people to go check it out. Thank you so much for coming on the show.
Yeah, it's been my pleasure, Jason. I really appreciate it.
Thank you.
All right, bye.
Thanks, Joshy, for coming on the show. RChain is a fantastic project. I think being a cooperative will really give them a distinct advantage going forward. I wouldn't be surprised if we see a lot more projects going in this direction. Their tech is really unique too. I strongly suggest checking out the show notes to learn more about RChain and the community forming around them. You've been listening to the Talking Cryptocurrency podcast. My name is Jason Rigden, and I have been your host. Thanks for listening to the show. If you liked it, would you please consider giving us a rating and a review on iTunes? I look forward to talking to you again soon. Have a great day.